In the past, we've seen sentences like this. Salvius kicks the sleeping dog. Kicks here is the main action. It's the actual verb. It's the thing that Salvius is doing. Salvius is kicking. Sleeping, however, seems like an action. It is an action, but it's not a verb. It's not the main action. So what is this thing in here? Sleeping is a word that is modifying the word dog. What type of a dog is it? It's a sleeping dog. It has an action quality to it, but it's not the main action. Later on, we saw sentences like this. Quintus has a broken heart. The main action here, the actual verb, is has. Quintus has. What does he have? Quintus has a heart. Broken, again, has an action quality to it, but it's not the action. It's not a verb. It's modifying the word heart. It's a broken heart. Quintus has a broken heart. These things are participles. We've been speaking about participles for quite some time now. Participles are part verb and part adjective. They come from a verb, which is why they have that action quality to them. But in fact, they're used as adjectives because they modify a noun. Because it's a part verb, it shows time. It has a tense to it. It has a present tense, a past tense, and yes, it has a future tense, although we won't speak about those until the future. And because it's part adjective, because it's being used as an adjective, it must agree with the noun. It must genick. So let's go back to our example. Salvius kicks the sleeping dog. The dog is sleeping at the same time as it is kicked. So when we talk about the tense of a participle, when did this happen? Right? The dog is sleeping at the same time as it is kicked. Because it's happening at the same time, we say that this is in the present tense. This also works even if I said Salvius kicked the sleeping dog, it would still be at the same time. As long as the participle is happening at the same time as the main verb, we call it the present. And because the dog is the one who is doing the sleeping, we say that this is an active participle. The dog is doing it, it is active. Let's compare that to Quintus has a broken heart. Let's go back to this one. When was the heart broken? Quintus's heart was broken sometime before this statement. We don't know when, and it doesn't really matter. It was before. Quintus has it now, but it was broken before. And so we call anything that happened before, we call this a perfect tense. It's a completed action. It's already been broken. We don't know who broke it, but it wasn't Quintus. Unlike with the sleeping dog, Quintus's heart was broken by somebody else. Since Quintus didn't do it and it was done by somebody else, we call this passive. So let's take a look at some examples. Senex, poetum laudans, vehementer clamabat. First of all, what's the actual action? Clamabat. He was shouting. That's the action. So where's our participle? What's our actiony word that's modifying a noun? Laudans. It comes from the verb laudare, means to praise. What type of participle is this? Hope you got it. It's a PAP. That's right. Who's laudans? Who's being modified by praising? Is it the senex or is it the poet? And we look at this and we recognize this as a nominative. We say it must be the senex. The senex is the one praising. So we say the old man praising the poet was shouting loudly. Good. Miles ab hostibus visis post arborum se celat. Here we go. Where's the actual verb? Where's the action? Celat. That's our action. It means to hide. Well, he hides. So where's our actiony word? That's not really an action, but it's modifying something. Visus. Having been seen. What type of participle is this? Hopefully you can recognize it, especially when I translate it for you, having been seen. That's right, it's PPP. Who's it referring to? Hopefully you recognize that the US is a nominative ending. We look, and the only person that we see that's also nominative is the soldier, the melees. So what do we have here? We have the soldier having been seen by the enemies, or the enemy, hid behind a tree, or hid himself behind a tree. Happened in the past. He was already seen before he hid himself, and he didn't see anybody. He was seen by somebody. Therefore, it's passive. What about this sentence, though? For gemmās adeptus ēffugit. What's our action? Ēffugit, that's our verb. Ran away. What is our participle? What's our actiony word, but it's actually it's actually an adjective. Adeptus. This is one of your vocab words. How did you translate it? As having received or having obtained. What's going on here? The thief obtained the gems before he fled. Therefore, it must be perfect, because that was our definition of perfect. But wait a second. The thief is the one who did the obtaining. It wasn't done by somebody else. It was done by him. And using our earlier definition, that must mean that this is active. So let's put these, our participles in the grid. And let's see what we've got here, because we have something strange going on with that last one. We have active and passive up on the top, present and perfect over there on the side, and our present active participle. There's the information that we should know about that, right? We recognize the ns and the nt. It's a third declension adjective. We translate it as ing, and here's an example here: portans, carrying. There's no such thing as a present passive participle in Latin. There are in English, but not in Latin. Our perfect passive participle that we met last stage, right? This we don't create this. We take it from the fourth principal part of a verb. It's a 2-1-2, so it declines in the first and second declensions, and we translate it as having been something. So portatus, our example there, having been carried. What about this new participle, the perfect active? Well, this is for special verbs only. It is a 2-1-2, so it declines in the first and second. So adeptus was in the second, and so here we go, having something. Unlike in English, where there are perfect active participles for most any verbs, in Latin they're only special verbs. I cannot make a perfect active participle out of our example word portare. I cannot. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't work that way. You've already seen some of these special words before. Some are in your vocabulary: adeptus, ingressus, and precātus. Having obtained, having entered, and having prayed. These are those new participles. But then in our model sentences, we were shown conspicatus, having caught sight of, and regressus, having returned. You might realize that regressus is very similar to ingressus, one of your vocab words, which is why you should have been able to translate it fairly easily the first time you saw it. These things are perfect because the action already happened. However, they're active, in quotation marks, active, because the noun that it modifies is doing the action. The thief having returned, the old man having caught sight of, the priest having prayed. The noun that it's talking about is doing the action. Therefore, it is quote unquote active. But why am I saying quote unquote active? Well, it's not really active. See, in Latin, there's a group of verbs, however small group of verbs, that have passive forms. They look passive, but we translate them into English actively. They're called deponent verbs. We call them deponents because they put down, depono, they put down their passive meaning. They're not really active. They're deponent. We have to translate them as active in English because we don't have this idea in English. We only have passive and active. We don't have this middle ground, this strange deponent thing that looks passive, but it's not. In Latin, there is, and also in ancient Greek, there is this form of strange middle ground where it looks passive, but it's active. So it looks like a PPP, but we don't translate it that way. We translate it with the active, in the active voice. Because only of these special deponent verbs can fit into this box, there really is no such thing as a perfect active participle in Latin. Again, in English is a different story. The problem with this is that our book will call them perfect active. But because only these deponent verbs can do this, I am going to call them perfect deponent participles. Also, this has the added benefit of not having two participles called PAPs and then having to distinguish between perfect and present. Let's not do that. We'll call them PDPs and everyone will be happy. Here's the question now. If they look like PPPs, how the heck am I ever going to tell these things apart? Well, I got two things for you. First, if it looks like a PPP, assume that it is one. PPPs are way more common than PDPs. If it looks like one, assume it is. If it doesn't make sense, then take away the bin and see if it translates better. For instance, for aulum ingressus coronam rapuit. Let's try translating this as if it were a PPP. The thief, having been entered the palace, stole the crown. Well, that sure doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Let's take ingressus and get rid of the bin inside of it and see what that sounds like. The thief, having entered the palace, stole the crown. Aha! There it is. It is one of our PDPs. The second tip I can give to you is that you could just memorize them. They're rare. It's a small group. Some of them have very important meanings. Here are our three vocabulary words. If you know ingressus, then you can figure out egressus and regressus. Here's one we've already seen. And here's some really important ones. Secutus, having followed. Profectus, having set out. Locutus, having spoken. And passus, one of my favorite ones, having suffered. These words here, as you can tell, are going to be used over and over and over again. A lot of these are pretty common, and they're going to pop up time and time again. We're not going to actually speak about what deponents are specifically until Latin 3, or rather, I should say, until year 1 of DP. But these are a good entryway into the strange world of higher Latin grammar, where we have these words that look like they are passive, but in fact, they're not. They're translated as active. What do I really want you to take away here? Just know that we have, right now, there are three kinds of participles. We have present active, which we recognize by the NSNT, portans, portantis, meaning carrying. We have perfect passive, which comes from the fourth principal part, portatus, portata, portatum, means having been carried. And now we have our new group, the perfect deponent participles, that are only these special verbs. You cannot make a normal verb fit into this in Latin. Only special verbs will do this. For instance, ingressus, having entered, and all those that short list on the previous slide. PPPs and PDPs look very similar, and so in order to determine between them, you must either use context or memorize to differentiate. And that's really about it. Participles are huge in Latin and in English. We use them quite frequently, and so you need to be able to differentiate between the three different types and translate them accordingly. And that's it. Those are participles. Those are three flavors of participles that you'll be seeing, and hopefully this helped. Bye.